CES 2024 in Las Vegas has come and gone. Every major TV manufacturer was there with their absolute best, their flagships for 2024 and their prototypes. But one manufacturer missed it for the second year in a row. That manufacturer was Sony. While Sony sat out 2023 CES, they managed to win the TV year in many of our opinions with the amazing 2023 TV lineup with the Sony A95L Master Series QD OLED. However, this year they managed to steal the storylines yet again before CES started talking about 4,000 nit LEDs. And they were a no-show yet again at CES, except they were there and they had a TV. Here we are with Sony's Rob Brennan to discuss what he shared, what he showed, and in my opinion, without officially being there, they still stole the show. Thank you so much for watching. Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Brian. This is Tech Therapy. I am here with very special guest and dear friend, Sony's Rob Brennan. Rob, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing fantastic. Just got back from CES last week. Had a great time there, and now just getting back in the swing of regular work.
And it was great to see you there, Rob. Really quickly for our audience, most of them know you, and again, I'm honored to have you here. Just explain quickly who you are and what you do for Sony.
Sure, absolutely. And again, it's always my pleasure to be here, Brian. So I've been with Sony for almost 12 years now. It'll be 12 years this summer. And my current role at Sony is I'm the manager of technology and training for our home entertainment and sound division. So essentially what that means is all of our home theater products or kind of personal audio products when it comes to technology, when it comes to working with not only our media partners, of course, you're one of them, right? To help kind of communicate the technology, the benefits, the larger kind of strategy that Sony has, as well as work directly with customers in order to kind of catalog their desires, their wishes, their preferences, their complaints, all of their kind of feedback in general. And then I work with our product planning team in Tokyo and the engineers. We talk about, what is going to be kind of the future of, these products in terms of maybe firmware updates or hardware. So in some ways, I think of myself as an intermediary between whether it's our engineers, and our customers, or whether it's our press and our marketing team. I'm always the guy stuck in the middle. That's who I am.
Well, and you're amazing at it. And Rob, and I'm not alone in saying this, your passion for not just Sony, but the products, and also your respect for your competitors. Being at CES a few years now, I've talked to all the manufacturers, and your gamesmanship is still held with such respect for the other manufacturers. Even behind closed doors, you don't talk any smack. You have a good respect for all the technologies out there. And as you said to me several times, you don't have to buy a Sony, but let me give you an argument on where you may like it and if you like something else. You're the only one I've met from any of the manufacturers that shares that thought process. So I love that on camera and off camera, we have that. But quickly, I want to just go ahead and set the stage that Sony did not go to last year's CES in 2023. You and I talked before that, and you let me know that you guys weren't going to be there. And then all the speculation. I did several videos on where is Sony, where is Sony. You then came on. We talked about the lineup. We introduced it. And in my opinion, Sony won the year. And some of it was due to them not being there. The A95L and the other A80L behind me, other TVs throughout the year, I thought Sony won the year, even without the Z9K mini LED. The QD OLED was the king. It won the year, and it was amazing masterstroke on Sony's part. This year was a little bit different. I knew, again, you guys wouldn't be there. All the speculation from all of our followers was Sony's not going to be there again. They'll have video games and cars.
Right.
Yet I found out that you guys would be there. And then I found out you guys would be there with a TV. I kept that under wraps as I was asked to. And then the narrative before CES, maybe 2 weeks before, there was some talk about Sony killing OLED. And they're going to go for 4,000 nits. And everyone thought that was very interesting because they just saw you guys win the year with the A95L QD OLED. Mini LED is dead. 8K is dead. And then, Rob, I was luckily very fortunate and grateful to you, Mara, and the team to have me at this black box reveal. in my opinion, what you showed there, especially with something that was close to my heart, I feel you guys stole the show. I want to share a little bit about what you showed us, and I thought it'd be more prudent to have you share it versus me just kind of saying what I saw.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And we were thrilled. I was when we first internally started discussing what we were going to do. I'll be honest, my mind turned immediately to you based on some of the conversations we have had. And I was talking to my team internally, like Mar, and I was like, we got to make sure that Brian comes. I think he has a very interesting perspective. He's not, kind of the typical TV reviewer. Kind of can take a step back and see a larger picture. And
yeah,
quite frankly, I like hanging out with you. So I was like, Brian's got to be there.
Yeah, and I take that as the biggest compliment in the world. My channel is very small, but our community is passionate, and they love having you on, which is why I don't edit these, Rob, because people have told me your balance of what you're explaining and everything, people learn. I learn through these conversations. So I'm going to shut up for a lot of it, but please tell me what even the thought process was for you guys to actually be there. You had a great year last year. We did the victory lap talking about the A95 and the whole lineup. This year, what was the mindset in heading into this year's CES?
Sure, I think there are two things I want to kind of communicate. I think your audience will find interesting. First, regarding why we are not showing televisions like consumer products. Like, here's the lineup at the show. CES is a great show. The downside of CES is that it's a great show. There's a lot of people there. There's a lot of media. There's a lot of manufacturers. There's a lot of cool technologies. And so you end up oftentimes kind of getting lost. Your message, your announcements can kind of quickly move through the media cycle. And then they kind of disappear. And so what we decided to do last year and what we decided to do this year as well is to have our product kind of announcement closer to when our product is going to be available so that it has a better chance to stand out. Consumers will have an easier time finding information on it because it's not competing with everything else happening at the time. And then, quite frankly, from a business perspective, any excitement that the announcements kind of generate, there's less time between that initial excitement and when a product is available to purchase. And so that's kind of the idea. Now, as you mentioned, last year we didn't show the product. We also didn't do anything for the media. This year, a little bit different. We decided to do something specifically for the media with regard to this television, specifically this prototype television. And that was something that we decided to do because it is, as you kind of mentioned, I don't know that I would characterize it as the death of QD OLED, but it is I don't say difficult, but it certainly is. You kind of talk about it. Here's this new prototype television, and we just won this shootout last year, this prototype's mini LED, and it does start to raise questions. And so we decided to spend a little bit more time with media partners in the build up to when the product is launched, so that it's clear what it is we're trying to achieve, right? So let's talk, I think, for a minute about what it is that we're trying to achieve.
Well, Rob, the 4,000 nits, I'll just stop you quick with the A95L. It wasn't just that. It was also that your X95L mini LED last year, in my opinion, was your most refined LED to date. Mm-hmm. Its local dimming was on point. Shadow detail was there. Blooming was nearly not there. Accurate. However, it wasn't your brightest LED. It looks like it was about 2,500 nits. It wasn't as bright as the Z9K. More importantly, it wasn't a Z9G at 4,000 nits. Mm-hmm. So I know your guys being so efficient with your zone count, which we'll discuss later. I thought you had solved that and said, hey, look, our mini LED group is just more about refinement. We're not going to go big numbers. Here's QD OLED. And then when I heard 4,000 nits, that's what I think everybody said, wait a minute, I thought they weren't going for that. And I know there's a reason why we're going at 4,000 nits, but I think your whole message last year about the X90, X93, and mostly the X95, no Z9K, people thought, well, I thought they weren't, that's not their thing. And my rebuttal to that was 4,000 nits has been done by Sony before with the Z9G and even I think the Z9K, definitely with the Z9G. But I thought that it's amazing how these storylines change year after year.
Right. And the reason there's been let's say, some refinement and kind of direction is because Sony both operates on the consumer side and the professional side. And so as different technologies, as different appetites with what, directors and movie studios and TV studios want to do, as consumer kind of behavior kind of changes, you have to kind of understand where you need to be investing, what direction you need to go. And so when it comes to where we are now, there are a couple of things, and I'll go over these fairly quickly. First, obviously, movie theaters took a huge hit during the pandemic. But what we've seen post-pandemic is not the return to pre-pandemic numbers in terms of ticket sales and the whatnot. So essentially, consumer behavior has somewhat changed. Consumers realize that I have a pretty darn good movie experience at home, and I don't have to put on nice clothes. I can wear pajama pants. I can go.
I wear those to the theater anyway.
Right. I can just hang out as long as I solve my movie theater popcorn butter sauce, which I'm a huge fan of. I can solve that problem, right? I can have this great experience. And so as a byproduct of that, it was already happening, but now it's accelerating. You have studios that are making content specifically for home viewing that was never designed to go in the movie theaters. The most recent example that I could give is Zack Snyder in Rebel Moon. The way that he shoots it, the way that he grades it, and again, I'm not talking about a lot of slow motion because there's a lot of slow motion. But the way that he shoots it, the way that he grades it, the way that he uses HDR and brightness is all based on his knowing that it's going to be viewed in a home and not a movie theater. And the technologies are wildly different, right? So that's one aspect. Here's the other one, and this is something we talked about, at the show. Sony makes mastering monitors that are the industry standard, right? The current model is the BVM HX310. It is a dual-layer LCD monitor, about 30 inches. About 80% of all movie studios, TV studios, live broadcasts use this as their reference monitor. So when we say creative intent, what we mean is it should look like that. That's what we're talking about. But this is not our first professional monitor. It's our second. The first one was the BVM HX300. It was a true RGB OLED. The problem is that it could only do about 1,000 nits on a 10% window. So everyone liked the color, but it wasn't really convenient for mastering HDR content. And so the feedback from the studios and the directors was making HDR is kind of a pain, right? Yep. And so in order to make that easier, we made the 310, which is 1,000 nits full field. And they're like, this is much better. But it's still kind of a pain. Oftentimes in HDR content, our highlights are over 1,000 nits. Maybe up to 4,000 nits is not unheard of. And so to grade that, I can only grade 1,000 nits at a time. I have to do multiple passes through a scene to check my highlights. So from a production kind of time perspective,
cost, absolutely,
it's not great.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. And we came up with the HX3110, which is the new model that's just now available. 4,000 nits peak brightness. So the idea here is that it makes it much easier for directors, for studios to master HDR and to incentivize them to continue to push the boundaries in terms of, brighter, more impactful, more vibrant, more color volume content, right? And so that's the scenario. So when we look back and we say, okay, well, now we're in a bit of a pickle. We just made this professional monitor that's going to do all this amazing stuff, and we're the company that talks about creative intent and recreating it in the home. What's the platform that we need to be able to do that? And so that's what this prototype technology is, which is a mini LED-based television that essentially, compared to the X95L, it's 50% brighter, right? And it does have a significant increase in terms of zone count to improve not only the brightness, because you can move power around, but also just blooming reduction and black level performance and localized contrast, right? As a matter of fact, simply put, the primary difference between the current BVM HX310, which is the standard today, and the HX3110, which is going to become the new standard. The only major difference between those two is that the 3110 uses the backlight we designed for our consumer televisions.
So yeah, that's incredible. Because Rob, when you guys talk about 4,000 nits, I thought Sony Pictures were going to just start making 4,000 nit movies. But the fact that you're creating the reference monitor there was a need for. Not to mention, I know you had told me about a Dolby monitor that's also not being made anymore.
Right.
Time was of the essence for you guys.
Yeah, that was the Dolby Pulsar. So it was a monitor made by Dolby Laboratories. Fun fact: you couldn't purchase it; you had to rent it. But it was a 4,000 nit display. So if you were grading, high brightness HDR, you'd rent this, you'd bring it in, you'd be able to look at it, more efficiently because you would look at everything in one go rather than looking at, 0 to 1,000 nits, adjust the contrast down, and then you look at 1,001 nits to 2,000 nits, and then adjust it down. And you keep on doing these 1,000 nit increments. You can look at it all, and that product is no longer available. So there became this really obvious need, and based on the conversations we have with studios, it's a pain point for them. One of the things that Sony does a lot of, we have a facility called the DMPC in Los Angeles. If you're a studio or you're a director and you're interested in using Sony equipment, you call them up, and it doesn't cost you anything. You call them up, you go there, and they have our equipment and they show you how to use it. They have a set, it's all lit, right? They walk you through it. If you're a studio, and again, not Sony Pictures, if you're another studio, another director, and you've already purchased it, you're like, I don't know how to use it. No problem. Yeah. Call them up, set up a time, go there, and they'll teach you how to use it. So we're big in this idea of helping, the industry in general improve their not only skill set, but their toolkit to make better content. Because for selfish reasons, we make the devices and those toolkits, but we also make consumer products in the back end so people can interact with and enjoy and consume that content. And we also make content ourselves. So we benefit from it directly. We benefit from it financially. Consumers benefit from it. And that's kind of the position ultimately that Sony takes. And that's why Sony's never been a company that says, our goal is to make the brightest TV, full stop. Or our goal is to have the most zones of any television, full stop. Or want to make the thinnest television, full stop. We intrinsically tie ourselves to kind of the current standards that exist in the professional space for creative intent. And in this case, future standards is kind of where we go. So, unlike Spinal Tap, our amps don't go to 11 just because,
But you can just do 10. What I love about that thought process, and like you said, it's unlike years past. We talked about 4,000 nits with, say, Dolby Vision. We always were chasing 4,000 nits. And then for the last number of years, it hasn't been necessary. We all didn't know why. Well, half the content maxes out at 1,000 nits. Many people didn't understand it's because the reference monitors they were using, it's kind of, you're not creating a need, you're filling a need, which then helps us versus other manufacturers. Hey, we're doing 10,000 nits. We always said, well, if I'm never going to see that, I'm not going to sacrifice contrast ratio for that. Now you're saying the reference monitors that we're making are going to be, again, in 80% of the Hollywood are looking for this. That'll give them, as you said, the want to go farther, because we talk about budgets, Rob. And as an artist, they're going to be grading. It's so arduous to try and put 4,000 nits out there if no one's going to see it. And if I have to do several passes, it's money. Now, if you'll be able to give them that tool, but that tool at the same time is what I saw at CES as a consumer based. Very rarely is the consumer tied to what's happening at the same time.
Yeah, typically, we create technologies that start at the top and then filter their way down, right? Whether it's
like an F1 car or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're the first time you have a really cool TV technology, it's like only in the flagship model. 2 years later, it's like every TV has it, and the flagship has something else that makes it kind of special. This is the first time to my knowledge, that a consumer technology, i.e., the backlight system and algorithm that runs it, is being put into basically the true flagship, which is the professional mastering monitor.
Yeah.
So, I kind of jokingly said when we were in Vegas, it's like, no longer is the consumer prototype in this case trying to match the professional monitor. Now the professional monitor's trying to match our consumer essentially television in this prototype kind of format. But the other thing, just going back a second, yes, we are solving this pain point, but remember, with the change of consumer behavior and with the continued kind of interest in consuming content at home, studios and directors are also saying, well, yeah, when I did make stuff just for the movie theaters, 4,000 nits wasn't as important. No projector in a movie theater is hitting 4,000 nits. It's just, that's not in the cards for it. It's not hitting 1,000. Well, maybe 1,000 nits, but that is even a long shot. But quite frankly, no one walks out of a movie theater saying, I would have loved the movie if the HDR was better. The scale of the screen and the scale of the audio kind of offsets the objective difference in kind of picture performance between a movie theater and the home. But now that there's this huge demand for content delivered day and date in the home or exclusively to the home, it is doubling down on the studio's interest and director's interest in making content that is more in line with television performance versus cinema performance. It doesn't mean cinema is dead, right? You're certainly going to have directors. You'll probably read about it. You've probably already read about your directors. The only good movie is a black and white movie, or this argument goes back forever, right?
I'll make sure my motion is off.
Right. So it's like when sound was first introduced, right? There was the huge kind of, this is going to ruin movies. And then when color was introduced, this is going to ruin movies. And when 3D was introduced, well, let's not talk about that one, right? But you kind of get the idea. This is just a new evolution of the not only the capabilities for the artists, for the directors and the studios, whatever, but it's also tied to the desires and interests and habits of what customers are looking for. And so that's what really makes this kind of a notable direction.
And that's what's rare, Rob, because typically a technology is thrust on a creator or on an audience. Hey, AK, use this. Dolby Atmos, use this. Where instead you have the studio looking for it. Right. So I'm confident that with this TV or this prototype, whatever we're going to call it for now, it's not going to be something, hey, 4,000 nits is going to sit unused for 5 years until some studio, they want to use it. So I think you'll see that HDR impact versus the perceived impact you and I've talked about with OLED, where it's not really as bright, but QD-OLED is bright. We're actually going to see what 4,000 nits, not going to be in your eyes the whole time. But I want to get into the demo quickly, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We didn't know what to expect. And again, it was great to leave CES. You guys were in a different location. And again, I was honored to be there. And again, thank you for that. Walking in and seeing the prototype, and you came over to us. I want to quickly touch on something. We can go back to it. The BVM was there. The reference monitor was there. A competitor was there. And your prototype was there as well. Several of them, or two of them, or I believe it was two of them. Something with your light sensor I thought was interesting. And I know we touched on this. These are long streams, and we touched on this in previous. The light sensor for many of us is an eco thing that people turn off right away.
Right.
You were able to show me standard out of the box, which is Sony's out of the box settings that a lot of people love. And you had the reference monitor playing with a competitor of equal flagship status. And you had a Minority Report, which is a famously difficult film to show from Steven Spielberg. It's very, whites are bloody. It's very staticky looking. And you were able to go in standard. Both of the TVs were in standard. The reference monitor was there. You then hit the lights and you put on the light sensor, and then just tell me what happened after that, because to me it was like a magic trick to see what
Sure.
the
Yeah. So the idea, first of all, is that when we think about creative intent, I just want to give this quick aside here. When we talk about creative intent, yes, we're talking about this BVM, but the reality, the challenge of the BVM is that it's a professional tool. If you're using that tool in a professional environment, the lights are turned off. Not just are the lights turned off, but I wouldn't be wearing this shirt or this hat because the reflection of this blue would hit the screen and affect the color.
And I couldn't wear this, right?
Yeah, I'd be dressed like you. I'd be wearing grays, very dark, kind of earthy kind of tones. We don't expect customers to like view in the dark and wear like dark clothes in order to get the experience. And so when we think about creative intent, we've had to expand the reality to say we still want the BVM experience and the feeling and the artistic kind of interpretation of the BVM, but sometimes you're viewing in the middle of the day in a living room, and the only vehicle to kind of facilitate this is the light sensor. So that's our reasoning here. Just because you're in standard mode, just because you're in using a light sensor, doesn't mean we've abandoned the idea of creative intent. You don't have to be in a particular mode, and you don't have to have the TV calibrated. We say creative intent for anyone who buys a Sony. So essentially what happens is in standard mode, when you're looking at the Sony television and the BVM, they do objectively look different. One is brighter, right? But tonally, you can tell that they're related to each other. You can see that one inspired the other. The competitor, not quite so much. It's very subjective how different they are. To my eyes, they're extremely different. But there's clearly a difference between the two in terms of their closeness and how they resemble the BVM. Now, when we turn the lights off, after about 4 seconds, because our light sensor doesn't immediately go, oh crap, the lights are off, and jump up and down.
That would be jarring.
It's a little difficult. Two things happen because our light sensor is both looking for the amount of ambient light, but also the color temperature of the light. So it adjusts the white point, it adjusts the brightness, and at the same time, the processor adjusts the tone mapping. And all of a sudden, within about 4 seconds, I would say that the difference between now the BVM and the Sony, it's still in standard mode, is, I don't know, 90%, 90% there, 85% there. It's pretty darn close. Right? Is it 100% spot on? No. We have modes that are designed to do that, and you can calibrate to get the rest of the difference. But it's certainly for the layperson, but even for someone who's enthusiastic but doesn't want to go through the extra steps of always changing picture modes. I mean, it's there. And again, by comparison, this competitive model also has a light sensor that's designed to, according to their description in the menu, adjust the brightness. But the brightness doesn't really change, and then the difference becomes wildly apparent. Now, all of that being said, again, you could calibrate a competitor set and a Sony set. You could limit as much as possible those differences.
Yeah.
I still think, again, based on the shootout, the Sony would get closer even after calibration. But the point is, creative intent is not just for the calibration customer when it comes to Sony's kind of thought. And that's what we try to show at the demo, is that you kind of have the ability to set it and forget it. And I don't want to get sued. I think that was that was a Billy.
Yeah, that's an oven. That's an oven.
Whatever that was.
Well, for me, that was a magic trick, simply because I think for a lot of you guys that enjoyed standard presets, when the lights do get dark, I would just say to any of you that have a Sony TV, give it a shot. Keep your preset however you like it. Try the sensor. But the fact that it looked that close to the BVM, and I've seen 100 TVs, especially in the Value Electronic shootouts for the last 5 years, calibrated to the BVM, to see this LED look just like it. I mean, the closest I've seen to it that's a non-OLED, I was absolutely blown away. So try the light sensor. Don't disable it. Try turn off your eco. But Rob, I was blown away too. But also seeing the competitors both had a very cool, loud standard that one didn't change at all. So, but moving on to the next prototype. This was the actual Now that was with the prototype, correct?
No, actually, that demo
that was the X95.
That was just the X95L to show this underlying concept. The prototype isn't to the point where we have created the various picture presets yet.
Gotcha. So try that with your TVs, guys. If you had a 2024 model, the next one to me was even more mind blowing because this was the actual prototype that went against a QD OLED. I believe were they 85? What was the sizes that we had? 75.
I think it should have been a 75.
Yeah, so it was 75. It went against also a QD OLED and the competitor's 75 with a very high zone count. And that demo was also very telling, Rob. It was, I believe, it was gradients and colors and brightness. But the part of this conversation, I think, is local dimming. The amazing parts of leaving things bright, lack of blooming, but the image looked, to me, more lifelike on the mini LED than on the QD OLED. There was a few different images. If you can walk me through those, they were shockingly different, but the mini LED felt more true to life to me from Sony.
Yeah, so when we think about brightness is just a vehicle, right? It's trying to get us somewhere. So it is important. And I obviously don't want to downplay. We've just talked about, the importance of, brightness for HDR, but it's just this vehicle. It unlocks a whole lot of interesting things. It unlocks a lot of color volume. It unlocks this really kind of natural, true kind of sense of color, especially in brighter scenes. And I don't just mean like peak highlight. One of the clips, I know I'm describing this. One of the clips is a girl standing in this red dress holding red flowers, and she's on a bridge, and it's in a bright sunny day. So it's not a highlight shot. It's just a bright shot. But because of this ability to reach another level in terms of brightness, what it really unlocks is all of this amazing color, which in turn unlocks depth. So when we think about the importance of kind of picture quality, how you build it, you start with contrast. Contrast reveals colors, and colors resolve clarity, right? And that's the kind of the sequence that you want to think about the importance of these issues. But the ability to show, let's put it this way: if you're looking at a picture of an 8-ball, the reason that it's round is that the colors change. And that's what tells your brain it's a 3-dimensional shape. It's a sphere. If it's all exactly the same color, you would think it's just a circle. It's a 2-dimensional shape. And so the ability to show all these various tones and shades in bright scenes creates this sense of depth and realism in a naturally look scene like you would see when you walk outside. And so that's one of the first things we wanted to show. But the obvious question that everyone has as soon as you're talking non-OLED is, but how good's the black level? And is blooming
micro contrast and the micro contrast that you've discussed.
And so then we showed a demo of that as well, to show very, very kind of extreme scenes of bright on dark. Can you show gradation coming out of black? Can you, within that again very dark shot, can you also have a really bright highlight and show gradations of highlights?
Rob, if you back up to that last demo with the leaves, sure. Real quick, I want to touch on that. You and I discussed micro contrast.
Yes.
The black level on the prototype was very close. Now, it wasn't a WRGB OLED; it was a QD OLED, and I thought that it wasn't just the brightness, but the blacks lived pretty deep. Real touch on the micro contrast for me before we move on to the gradation part. I thought that was astounding how deep the blacks were. Forget about just the brightness. That micro contrast that LEDs can attain was had here in that last demo with the leaves.
Yeah, the nice thing when it comes to one of the advantages that LCD has is because of the nature of the LCD sandwich, it can be constructed in a way that light coming, not just when we talk about blooming, that's light. We don't want light to come out of it. Okay, fine, fair enough, right? Mm-hmm. But to get a really nice black, you also want light not to reflect back off of it, right? Any light that goes in, you want to be trapped. And so that's part of the job of the LCD sandwich and the various layers is to trap essentially ambient light that comes in and not reflect it. So we use various technologies. You can use things like skip reflectors or retroreflectors or just to try to capture the light internally. LCDs, just by nature of the fact that they have additional layers, have additional chances to kind of do that. And so that's one of the nice things about it in a brighter environment. And that's one of the things, of course, you noticed last year with the first QD-OLEDs is that when you turn them off, but you're in a bright room, the QD-OLED screen isn't as black as the OLED screen because it's by nature that is top layer emissive. There's a lot less opportunities to be able to capture any ambient light, and then it's just reflecting back out. And so you don't get black, you get like a dark gray. Now, as soon as you turn the TV on, the image is bright enough to trick your brain, and now you can't see a difference between the two, right? That's just a byproduct of like how our biology works. So yeah, the mini LED, we know from the prototype here, we know that we have to be able to deliver on a couple of fronts. You've got to be able to deliver this higher level of brightness because that's the point. You've got to be able to deliver, black level just in general. You've got to be able to deliver localized contrast, and you've got to be able to keep blooming under control. You've got to be able to check all those various boxes. And again, just going back to one of the reasons it performs so well is, aside from the second layer LCD in the new BVMH X310, that's how that monitor achieves those same performance results. So now it's, two things that are very similar, tuning them to kind of look the same, which is actually easier than tuning a WRGB OLED or a QD OLED to match a BVM, because you have things like jet offset, color offsets you have to do because colors are produced differently. It's easier to make a LCD, in this case mini LED kind of LCD product, look like a professional monitor because they start off so similar.
So the next demo, as you said, there was, I believe, run that one for me. That was coming up a slow gradation coming out of black. Right. Very bright. Was it like a red lamp? Was that the one?
Yeah, kind of like a paper lantern, and then like a red kind of flag behind it, and then pitch black everywhere else.
And I didn't muscle myself into this. I actually was looking at that off angle, which was even more impressive because I was off to the side. I muscled into the next demo where the screen was cut in half, but we'll jump to that in a second. But I was actually far away, and I had to get in the middle because we had a group with us. What I loved about not only the blacks being close enough to the QD OLED was there was also a demo with was an orchid or a flower that was purple or bluish, and one of the LEDs that competitor had some of the brightness, lost the color, and then also flattened out the blacks to avoid the blooming. And you and I talked about Sony's their signature of shadow detail keeps the image bright without flattening out the blacks. Right. So they would allow blooming in the past. So they don't have to worry about that. The QD OLED had the black crush to some degree and had the color and some of the brightness. The prototype had all the brightness, more color, and minimal blooming, but also had the shadow detail. So run me through, you were able to actually create more than all three of them, the other two actually, including the OLED.
Yeah, one of the, as I mentioned, one of the challenges without having the brightness, right? So QD OLED is fantastic, but not quite as bright. So you run out of gas at the top, right? The nice thing about QD OLED is you run out of gas, you don't shift white like a WRGB OLED does, but you still run out of gas. There's a ceiling that you're going to just run into because that's just your ceiling you're going to run into. And so that's one of the challenges. Obviously, we know the black level on an OLED or QD OLED is, it's fantastic, and the localized contrast is going to be good. But there is a problem potentially with black level, and you kind of touched on it with OLED and QD OLED, and it's a common kind of issue. I think Sony has largely solved it because we spend a lot of time with our electrical engineers. It's a power delivery problem at very low power levels. So when people say, it doesn't want to come out of black or the black level is crushed on an OLED, this is what they're talking about. It's quite difficult when you send very low power, levels to pixels to get them to do anything. The joke I make, it's kind of like a teenager getting them up in the morning. It's like, you got to be gentle. You've got to dump like a bucket of ice on them. to get them to like, oh, I'm awake.
Turn away.
And so you can have amazing black level, but that doesn't always translate to like perfect shadow detail, right? So you can get squeezed a little bit at the top with OLED, QD OLED. You get squeezed a little bit at the top. You can, if you have a power delivery kind of issue or it's not quite as good as it needs to be, you can be squeezed a little bit at the bottom. Your localized contrast is going to be fantastic, and the middle brightness is going to be great. And so the prototype or mini LED in general doesn't necessarily suffer from these challenges. The challenge it suffers to from a black level perspective is, can you get black, or are you getting near black? However dark you can get, it's easy to show gradations above it, but then you want to control blooming. So there are different. So both TVs have challenges. I don't want to suggest, and I never have in the past, that there's a technology out there that doesn't have clear advantages and disadvantages, right? The reason we're bullish on mini LED in general, and why the prototype in this case is a mini LED variant, again, goes back to the professional monitor, because it has very specific goals that it's looking to achieve. Hypothetically, right, let's speculate. If consumer behavior was like, no one wants to watch movies at home and everyone's flocking to the movie theater, viewing in the dark is the only way to do it, the emphasis would be on black levels and shadow details, and that's where the emphasis would be. That would be kind of the growth opportunity area. But that's not what we're seeing. And so that's why, while black level is important, and I'm not suggesting it isn't, the area that's being explored is high brightness, color volume, and general HDR impact, because that's what consumer behavior tells us is more interesting, right?
Finally, after like 8 years. I also love how you talked about quickly the reference monitors. We've always tried to match the home TVs with a dual layer LCD that no one has, or a certain kind of OLED that no one has. But you saying the reference monitor is this and our TV is this makes that correlation so simple, or not simple at all, but it is going to be a simple transition. Talking about shadow detail, more importantly, blooming control. I love that Sony didn't gray out the black. So you can actually see with some competitors how the TV would turn gray if the image was too fast, right, leaving the brightness. And then a lot of competitors would bump into the brightness of OLED and then actually lose both. They wouldn't be brighter than a QD OLED, and they wouldn't be darker. So that left LEDs to much larger and then cheaper variants without the processing.
Totally, yeah.
Streaming, you guys also were ahead of it with XR Clear being something that helps the streaming and low bitrate content. Please walk me through the next part of the demo, because this one, the way you put it about not being able to open the container of a competitor's mini LED back there. So tell me how you came up with that way of doing it. And give a shout out to anybody from the Sony teams. We met a very nice gentleman from Tokyo was there. If you're allowed to give them shout outs.
Oh yeah. Koichi Okasan, a good friend of mine. He's been with Sony. He's probably been with Sony like 200 years. He's
You changed that time. You said 80 years. Then you said 90 years.
But he, I don't know if he'll ever watch this, but if he does, my good friend Koichi is fantastic. And of course, I was thrilled that you got a chance, to meet him. Awesome. Yeah. So we've talked a lot at Sony about. We say it's not about the number of zones; it's about what you do with them, right? We've done this song and dance, and it's funny because we still always get the question, well, how many zones? Well, how many zones? Well, how many zones? Yep. Mm-hmm. And I'll respond, it's not about the zones. And then even when TV reviewers review the product, the conclusion they come to is Sony's zone control is some of the best in the business, right? Yeah. But we still felt that. They don't 100% believe us because they continue to ask.
We would say, Rob, with the X90L, for instance, we'd be like, look, the zone control is pretty good. However, there's only this many.
That's right.
And I think you guys setting the bar initially, I know we're going to come back to this, with the amazing Z9D. And those black levels, again, on angle, or at least in the sweet spot, as you and I have discussed in person. Everyone wants you guys to go back to that. And I know we'll go back into backlight master drive, but Sony's thought of saying, and I'll say this for you because I thought it was awesome. Look, the zone count is not our biggest concern. Brightness isn't either. However, we're gonna do 4,000 nits, and we're gonna have this many more zones. So please take it from there.
I know.
Because here you are convincing everyone we don't need that. And by the way, here it is.
Yeah. But as you know where I'm going with this. The brightness and the zone count is facilitated because we've done something else, right?
There's a need for it.
So first, let me kind of paint the picture so that the audience can understand what you saw in terms of the demo. In order to show what the backlight is doing, we basically took our prototype television and, again, the same competitive model, so it's a flagship model, mini LED from a competitor, and our engineers removed the LCD, cut the LCD in half, and then put it back on basically in the frame. So that on the left-hand side, you see the picture, and on the right-hand side, you're viewing just the naked backlight, the blue LEDs, and you're watching what they're doing. The competitive model, 720 local dimming zones, right? And despite having a pretty robust zone count, and Brian, you can confirm this, the zones don't behave very differently from each other. There's not a lot of what I was describing there is kind of zone complexity or zone diversity. It's like there's a lot, but they're all kind of little lemmings, right? If the scene is bright, they're all just on. If the scene is dark, they're all just off. Yeah, if there's just a logo in the center of the screen, yeah, just those zones are on. But those are all the same brightness, and then everything else is the same brightness, i.e. off, right?
Yep.
By contrast, on the Sony television, and Sony has never won an award for most zones in TV, you could make out the picture, what the picture was supposed to be, just by looking at the backlight. You could see a woman's face. You could see the spokes in the rim of a wheel of a car, right? You could make all of that out. And that's kind of the trade-off Sony has never been willing to make, because it is a trade-off. And this leads me into kind of this new development. This is not something anyone normally talks about, but essentially within your television, you've got these various kind of steps regarding kind of backlight. You got your processor. That's job is to interpret the incoming video signal. Maybe it's got to be upscaled, or maybe this, that, and the other thing, but it does whatever it needs to do to the digital signal. As far as the backlight, it then sends the digital signal to an LED driver. The job of the LED driver is to convert digital to analog and then control the actual LEDs or zones themselves, right? So what Sony has developed is basically the world's smallest LED driver. But despite it being very small, it's about the size of a sesame seed, it has the same complexity as the drivers we've used in the past. And I don't want to get too techie into this because it can be hard to follow, but essentially our driver operates on a 22-bit kind of system. By comparison, most competitor backlight drivers are either 8 or 10-bit. So our driver can do more things. Here's the problem. Here's the challenge. If you have a driver that controls 10 zones and the driver can do 100 things, at 10 zones, that means each zone can only do 10 different things, right? If the driver controlled one zone, the zone could do 100 things. And if the driver controlled 100 zones, each zone can do only one thing. So there's this bell curve of number of zone count. As it goes up, zone complexity goes down. And that's the trade-off. That's the actual physical, electrical engineering, super nerdy kind of, and I say nerd, but that's my love word.
We are that.
Right. But that's this hard physical limit that exists within this core technology. And so what we were able to do, working with our own internal Sony, microprocessing division, is develop a much smaller driver. The driver is smaller, but it still has the same complexity. And because it's smaller, we can physically put more LEDs on the board and not lose zone complexity. So we have tripled in this prototype. We've tripled the number of zones compared to the X95L, but the backlight is just as dynamic as it was. And the reason this is really important, especially this year, is there are other manufacturers that have made some really amazing claims in terms of their zone count. Now, in all fairness, I have not cut those TVs in half yet, but I'm gonna. And I'm gonna see how it operates, right?
Let me film that. I would love to shoot that one.
But, but the way that this core technology operates is that that's pretty far down the road of zone pure count, which should have a major trade-off in what the zones can actually do. So there's theoretically a point where you can say, I have so many zones that my TV is basically a direct lit LED television because it operates as one. Because my driver can't, it's all of its bandwidth is trying to control each zone. It can't tell them to do everything. It's herding cats, right? And that's ultimately what we're talking about. So this driver is not something super hot and awesome that people are typically interested in, but it's the key that's enabled us to do this. By increasing the zone density, we were able to achieve two things. That's where the brightness is coming from, because we can localize the power more efficiently to where it's needed. It's also 20% more power efficient whilst being 50% brighter at the same time. So power consumption is down, brightness is up, more zones means more or blooming reduction. And it's all because of this tiny little sesame seed, sized LED driver that is not the thing that typically we talk to customers about, because it's such a deep kind of engineering kind of tech thing and never makes it to the surface. So I was thrilled to be able to show it to you and pull up the board and put it in your hands. You're like, this is it. This is the secret sauce. Here,
But I hope you're gonna, now that you're gonna be responsible for everyone saying, well, how many drivers you got?
Yeah, I know.
How many bits are your driver? But it does make sense as
we'll get some counts.
But it makes sense as you've mentioned, because we've seen some pretty cool models in the last number of years, 5,000 zones, this many, and we've seen worse local dimming. But I think you just touched on it, as there are more zones crammed in, they're harder to control, and then you're almost going backwards to direct lit LED. I would tell you that by seeing the demo, not only was it so cool seeing the TVs cut in half, by being able to see through the image, this is real content, by the way. There were cars, and the logo was actually the most, I think it might have been a Sony.
Yeah, at the very end, it's a Sony kind of, the Sony logo pops up. It's a normal retail loop that we show at like a Best Buy. We'll see it.
So seeing the competitor, actually that logo wasn't visible at all. And on one pass, the whole screen was blue. And they were blue, like a bluish, purplish zone. I would argue that seeing the Sony prototype, it wasn't just that you could see through it a little bit. It seemed like the zones were hugging the image. So you could almost see not the image, but almost an enhanced version of the image, which I thought showed the local dimming was creating more 3D effect, actually getting into the contrast. So it seemed like you were seeing more detail, not just the image.
Well, and
so
that's,
I know that.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, a few minutes ago, or I don't know how long we were talking, maybe 2 hours ago.
It's supposed to be 30 minutes. That's why I don't edit these.
That's fine. It's fine. I love it. But remember, contrast, then color, and then clarity. Contrast is not just most important because visually, we're very sensitive to contrast, but it's a primary vehicle. And so you mentioned, the zones are hugging. It's not just a number of zones, and can you accurately make a white circle in the middle of a black kind of screen, because that's a great torture test. It's not probably indicative of most content, but how those zones actually can react to what's in front of it. It's not an on-off scenario. That's the other point I wanted to make for anyone who thought it was that just having lots of zones is not, I can turn off the ones I'm not using. It's no, I have gradations that I can apply based on the needs of the image in front. So I make bright brighter, I make dark darker, I make shadows shadowy. I make
detail.
mid-tones,
that's what we're saying.
and 3/4 tones and 5/8 tones. The backlight assists with all of those levels rather than just requiring the LCD to block X amount of light in order to achieve a certain brightness. It's just easier to get the results you're looking for, and the results are more impressive.
Well, and it was very jarring, and again, talking about micro contrast. But I wish I could have shown people the shadow detail. Normally with an LED, you say, okay, there's shadow detail. I can see the blooming. I'll trade one for. I actually rather have more black crush than shadow detail when it comes to an OLED. Seeing a QD-OLED still look amazing, but see exactly where the detail was lost and where the competitor graded out really made that TV the prototype. Now, the hard question, Rob, is how far away are we from something like this prototype? Is this years away? Is this something that you think we'll see soon? I know these are hard questions, but everyone's going to say, is this micro LED?
You got it. Everyone's asking it. So you if you don't ask it, you're not doing your job. No, it's a great question. So I can't give you a specific, and we're not ready to announce the specifics of the lineup for 2024. That being said,
lineup information yet, so yes, we're still waiting for that.
That being said, the core technology in this prototype is already being deployed in the HX3110 that is just now become available on the professional side. This prototype is far closer to the finish line than it is to the starting gun. And that's about as much as I don't want Mara. You met Mara, and I don't want her to beat me up. So that's about as far as I'm going.
When she sees it, what's funny is, for those who don't know Mara, is shout out to Mara. When she sees Rob and I talking, she could be across the room, and I could just see her all of a sudden. And I send all the videos to Mara after, obviously. I see her glaring at both of us to say, well, what is he saying to him?
Yeah, she wants to know how far over the line is he going?
How far are we going? But this isn't a technology. I know you and I have spoken in depth about micro LED, and which has its limitations, even brightness being a limitation, pixel pitch being another. I thought this was actually more impressive and realistic. So I am very excited to see when this will be implemented. This is because I know this isn't something that's a million years away. So I'm excited to see this hopefully sooner than later.
And listen, we are looking forward to sharing more details, not only the lineup, but just where TV and home theater and home audio and all this technology is going to continue to make products that deliver fantastic experiences for customers. For some people, watching a movie is I need to escape. I need to. Some people there's escapism, but it's just like, you know what? I just want to do this for a while and not think about anything else. And for some people, this is their passion. It's watching a movie, their favorite director, their favorite cinematographer, their favorite whatever. This is an important part of their life and their passion and their hobby. And so we look forward to continuing to work to deliver on those experiences. And I look forward to coming back in the very near future and giving much more information about what is going on with our product, televisions, with all this kind of stuff.
I can't wait. I can't wait for us to go through the lineup. I know we did that last year in detail. So hopefully you'll do that again. You'll come back and share the lineup with us. Can you just reassure our community that OLED is not dead? Sony is not abandoning OLED.
I was thinking to myself, we never actually got back to that OLED is dead comment.
Yeah, I figured we finish up with. I know our crew is like, I just bought an A95L. Or I have the A80L, which I love the TV. It's
Listen, me. Keep them. They're fantastic. They're fantastic products. And I made this point at the show. The prototype is in no way designed to say outright or even suggest that Sony is moving away from or abandoning QD-OLED or WRGB OLED, right? The prototype is really being put forth because there is this kind of specific need that was identified by studios and directors that we've now fulfilled with this new BBM HX3110 mastering monitor. And we have kind of in the works a consumer television technology in the form of this prototype that's designed to recreate that kind of experience. QD-OLED recreates a slightly different kind of experience, but that exists today. That exists, right now. There are different kinds of experiences. I think it's perfectly reasonable for any customer to choose whether it's an LCD-based product, a QD-OLED, a WRGB OLED, based solely on their personal preference or based solely on the specific needs that they have, right? And the specific kind of content they watch. If you're, if the only thing you're going to watch is Casablanca, fantastic. I don't actually I don't know. That's a terrible example. I don't know what television I would recommend for Casablanca, right? Yeah, it's only
XR
black
Clear,
and white,
baby. XR Clear's got that.
but they probably all work for that. But the real point I want to make is this prototype technology where we think we're going with mini LED is really around delivering this we'll call it high impact HDR future that we see that's coming to the home. And it's coming to the home because customers have shown an interest in viewing content there, because studios are making content specifically for that use case. And so this television is kind of the best thing for that. And then there are other televisions, other technologies that would be best for something different. That would still be very good at that, but you can't be first in everything.
So what I love, Rob, before I let you go, and I know we've talked about this off camera, is focus groups, things of that nature. I was a huge fan of the Z9D, like many of our audience, and Black Level, 940E, 900E, 930E. These are legendary TVs. In many of our opinions, the Z9F was a step back. It's focused on X-wide viewing angle. It changed the contrast a bit. Blooming, shadow detail became the conversation. I remember back then the thought being about focus groups and, hey, I need to see off the angles. What I love about what Sony is doing this year is it's not really a focus group thing. It's an industry thing. Movie studios needed this, so we built it. And then now that transition to me is more important than I want something that's better on my wall. And I think you're going to have many Sony fans that love that backlight master drive, which I know you had a part in naming that lovely backlit system. They've been waiting for a return to form in that regard. And the prototype that I saw was not just a return to form. It blew it away and is something that I thought, in my opinion, of everything that I saw, you guys stole the show without actually being on site.
Well, and I appreciate you saying that, because this whole backlight conversation draws its kind of zenith. No, not zenith is the wrong word. Its origin. Or hopefully we're not at the zenith. We want to continue to improve it, but it draws its origin. Its origins are the Z9D. This is the culmination currently, this prototype of that technology. I'll add this one thing for perspective. Obviously, one of the things that everyone loved about the Z9D is this idea that it didn't have zones. Each LED was independently controlled. But remember what I just told you about how LEDs are controlled. In order to do this, we needed a ton of drivers, more drivers than could fit. We had to create a supplemental board that housed all of the drivers. And the reason that was difficult is then you have power delivery problems, you have latency problems, and you have just signal kind of complexity. And that was why ultimately, while that was a fantastic television and we're thrilled we made it, at the end of the day, it was like, that's incredibly difficult to make work. Yeah. So we went back to, some combination of, motherboard and daughter board to kind of balance it out. And now we've moved all the way to, because we've been able to further enhance the drivers, now they live directly on the board. You get maximum performance and zone density at the same time. So while I said last year the X95 is the TV that finally retired my Z9D, when this new technology hits, that'll retire my X95.
Well, I'm already going to retire the one behind me that I just bought.
That's a you have more than one room. I don't think. Unless you're living in a loft.
Bathroom here.
In a loft, you got four walls. You don't need one TV. You have four.
Well, Rob, I know. Again, we plan on this being short. You squeeze me in. You're in the actual. You're in the ready for a launch. You have a ton of things going on. Again, from my community, thank you so much for all you do. Thank you to you, Pablo, Mara, the rest of the Sony squad. But also as a dear friend, thank you for making the time for me and our community. And I really appreciate it. I learned something every time. I can't wait to see what Sony brings. Keep in touch with me this year. I want to be able to bring everyone the lineup. And those of you watching, any concerns you have and anything you want to say, put in the comments. Rob does go back and check them out. But he loves being able to speak directly to you guys. And I'm glad that I can bring somebody like Rob to an audience. And again, I'm honored to have you. So I really, really appreciate it.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure as always. Thanks again so much. And to anyone watching, I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, I mean, if you throw a comment in there and I see it, or Brian sees it, lets me know about it, and okay with me typing my goofy answers, I'm happy to do that as well.
Absolutely, Rob. Well, don't work too hard. I will hopefully talk to you soon, and can't wait to have you on again, brother.
Sounds great. Appreciate it. Thanks, Brian.
All right.
It's better to burn